From the media that we consume to the products that we buy, it seems like everything today is a reboot, remake, or a reproduction of something from the past. The explosion and popularity of vintage styles and childhood classics is maybe not surprising on the surface, but the reasons why are kind of disturbing. Today's video is sponsored by Delete Me. Today, it seems like we are obsessed with yesterday, to the point where today's youth are starting to feel nostalgic for a time before they even existed. The best cultural barometer for this is the stories that we're telling ourselves right now. And if you've been keeping tabs on the new movies coming out, you'll know that last spring, we had the new Mario movie, Little Mermaid, and Barbie all coming out within the span of a few months. And for millennials like myself, it felt like we had hit rewind. And listen, it's not gonna stop, because the lineup of throwbacks coming to a theater near you shows that this trend is just getting started. Now, if Hollywood is just the beginning, then you know where we are probably going from here. But companies and brands have been weaponizing that fuzzy, familiar feeling that we all know as nostalgia to sell us all kinds of stuff that we really don't need. But today, it is at a whole new level than it has ever been at, leading to what some people are calling the rise of nostalgia bait. Nostalgia bait is a marketing strategy that uses our fond memories of the past to sell us things in the present. And you might be saying, yes, Levi, that is fairly obvious. But what you might not realize is just how bloody well it works. When we're feeling nostalgic for the past, we are 2.5 times more likely to purchase items, particularly if they're connected with an ad or commercial that makes us think of the past. So we've been seeing a lot of Mario, Pokemon, Barbie, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, basically anything that has Harrison Ford in it, because these were the movies that we loved as kids. Industries are churning out reboots and remakes and adaptations and more for the sake of manufacturing memory. Because the only thing that we seem to care about these days is reminiscing about the past. Probably because the present is kind of a shit show right now. Anything that you do nowadays, especially when you're online, there is likely a company vying for your attention in some way. And by interacting with those BuzzFeed style quizzes about what Hogwarts house you are or whatever, you might be opening yourself up to data brokers. Data brokers collect a huge amount of data from all over the web, and they make a profit selling it to anybody who will pay their fee. So you can spend hours scouring the internet to retrieve your personal information from hundreds of people's search sites, or you could let Delete Me, the sponsor of today's video, do that work for you. They've got international plans, so Canadians like us are covered now, thankfully. And did you know that when somebody buys your data, they can actually see information about your relatives as well? Fortunately, they now offer family plans, so I know that me and my family are all a little more protected. You can get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/future20 and use the promo code future20 at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/future20, code future20. So while Barbie was turning the world pink, it seemed like everybody else saw it happening and decided they would do exactly the same thing. Basically, every consumer category is tapping into this nostalgia. To get a sense of how widespread it is, all you have to do is take a look at what people are wearing. Take the brat aesthetic of Charlie XCX as a prime example of this, which is not just defined by lime green everything, but also calls back to the early 2000s. Across the world, fashion trends seem to be gathering around Y2K, and Paris Hilton's tracksuits are making a huge comeback for some reason. And another side thing that I think is kind of interesting is that compilations of infomercials from the early 2000s are getting views online again. I guess even the advertisements of our youth are somehow nostalgic now. So we talked about this a little bit more in depth in our video about why trends are getting shorter, and you can definitely watch that video after you're done with this one. If you like these kinds of breakdowns, you should probably just subscribe to the channel because we release a video like it every single week. But it seems like millennials like myself are especially affected by this nostalgia marketing. Look at basically every Super Bowl halftime show in the last 3 years. It's like they know that we are the last generation to know what the world was like before the internet. We know what it's like to just be bored, where you have to just watch the same movie for the 11th time or listen to the same CD because you simply didn't have any others. On top of that, and believe me, I don't want to sound whiny here, but a lot of us had our formative years buffeted by the Great Recession and were followed by a shitstorm of low unemployment and high cost of living and super intense student debt and shit. And this gives us the very cool and honorable title of being the first generation to be worse off than the ones before us. Nice. Don't worry though, Gen Zers, you're a target too, but in a weirder and almost more depressing way. If millennials are pining for the simpler times that they had when their families were watching together on those huge TV console things in the basement, Gen Zers are nostalgic for the childhood that they didn't have because the internet kind of ruined it. They're bringing back the 90s not because they grew up in it, but because it feels like that was the last time people had a real childhood without economic decline, climate change, a global health crisis, and the internet ruining our brains. But in terms of generations, millennials are an important spending target. They represent the largest group of consumers, with a CNBC article saying millennial households spend over $200 a day. Do we spend $200 a day? I saw the latte cup you brought home yesterday.
That wasn't $200. That was a London Fog.
But whether you're Gen Z or millennial, it seems like we are just obsessed with old stuff. We can see this with the boom of vinyl record players coming out, which we also made a whole video about if you want to check that out. And companies have just realized that if all we want is stuff from the past, then they'll just repackage new stuff to look like stuff from the past. And one of the more interesting ways that we have done this is through language and terminology, right? Instead of calling something old, we're calling it vintage. It's not outdated, it's retro. It's not secondhand, it's upcycled. This retrofication is appearing in our kitchen appliances too, with incredibly popular brands like Smeg selling new kettles that look like the kettles from like the 50s or something. We're gonna show the kettle. Look at this kettle. It's like genuinely like a beautifully designed kettle that looks like it's from the 50s, and it's made of plastic, but probably the originals were made of like cast iron or something. But listen, we're here now and you're going to see more of this type of marketing in the future, and how it really works is actually fascinating. Probably one of the most iconic and powerful examples of nostalgia marketing is Nintendo and their beloved character, Mario. Our favorite plumber first appeared as a side character in Donkey Kong, but it wasn't until 1983 that he got his own recognition and became the face of the Nintendo brand with the release of the Mario Bros. For a lot of kids, Mario was their first exposure to playing video games, so the impact was huge. The Nintendo Entertainment System, NES, sold 240 million units of the Mario Bros. Alone, and kids everywhere were obsessed. Later units only further cemented their role in many people's childhoods, with the N64 being a console of my upbringing. But if we flash forward to 2016, the video game world had become extremely competitive, and there's rising concerns that the world of online PC gaming would affect console sales moving forward. So Nintendo did something kind of innovative for the time. They decided to churn out some re-released classic games from the early 90s that people would have played during their childhoods, and it was a huge success. They sold more than 10 million retro units in 2019. But here's the important thing. The design looked a lot like the original product. It wasn't just that the games themselves that did the trick, but the way that Nintendo packaged their product made us feel like kids again. Nintendo's US head of sales, whose last name is actually Bowser, said, "Many of us have fond memories of the original NES, and we wanted to replicate the nostalgic feeling of sitting down and playing the NES with your family for the first time." Nintendo kept releasing classic systems, which quickly outsold their PS4 and Xbox competitors within days. And if you zoom out a little bit more and you look at the kinds of games that Nintendo releases, you can see why they are kind of the masters of this kind of marketing. Their core lineup uses the same characters, the same style of animation, and even the game mechanics are similar console to console. You could argue that Nintendo is still popular today in large part because of how they use this nostalgia. But sadly, in some ways I would say that Nintendo is kind of like the least shitty example of how nostalgia gets used to sell you stuff. Today it seems like just about every company is using it to their advantage. The reality is, it doesn't matter what the product is. If a company can create that emotional response in people that reminds them of the rose-tinted colored past in their minds, they're way more likely to buy the product because they want to hold on to that feeling. In fact, consumers statistically don't care as much about money when they're feeling nostalgic. There are an infinite number of ads trying to sell you the simpler times, right? Like this famous ice cream commercial where Blue Bell tastes just like the good old days. But a lot of the time, their nostalgia baiting is less in your face about it, serving you nostalgia by referencing popular media, like when the Full House cast reunited for a yogurt commercial, or the recent Mean Girls Walmart commercial for Black Friday, or getting the whole Office cast back together for this one that was apparently for AT&T and not a pillow company. That was a little confusing. We see big brands like Nike and Pepsi going back to their older 90s style logos or putting a retro spin on their products. Fast food chains are jumping on the bandwagon too, with Tim Hortons relaunching vintage donuts that nobody cared about, and McDonald's is now creating adult Happy Meals. The aim here, of course, is not just sell a new burger or donut. It's to remind people that they were a part of their past, and the good old days were good, weren't they? Well, apparently not really. This is the best and the worst part about this whole nostalgia phase that we're in right now. See, humans have a cognitive tendency to be selective about what we remember, preferring to remember the past as better than it actually was. It's like how you remember the excitement of Christmas morning, you know, running downstairs and getting all your presents or whatever. What you don't remember is that your uncle got really drunk, yelled at everybody, and then somehow fell off the roof later that night. Just as like a hypothetical, like, you know. And maybe that's not a bad thing by and large, you know, to remember the past is better than it was, but this concept that we create in our brain as the past being better than the present just gives these companies a really, really powerful tool to sell us a connection to that better time. We buy a ticket to the Mario movie because we want to feel a glimmer of what it was like to be a kid again. We associate his character with a time of our lives that we just can't get back to anymore. And there's some research to explain why this is such a big thing right now in particular. Because it turns out, when life gets harder, we get more nostalgic. So during times of economic stress, climate change, and, you know, global pandemics or whatever, we cling to the past for comfort, even if the past is just a coping mechanism of delusion. And this is the way that companies want it, because the worse our present feels, the more we will cling to their products from the past. If we recognize that the way that we glamorize the past is actually just a marketing lie, then we can strip it of its power and maybe go outside and touch grass instead or something. If you made it to the end of this video, we want to thank you for being here. If you want to support what we do and make sure that these videos keep coming out every single week, we have a Patreon page that allows you to contribute and get early access to videos, get access to exclusive content, and be more involved with our community. We are still a very small channel and we don't work with a lot of brands because our channel is not very well suited to brand sponsorships typically. So if you are here and you want to support what we do, it would make a huge difference if you went down there and just checked it out. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next week.